Hey everyone, and welcome to module 11 of this Django course. In this module, we'll be picking up where we left off in module 10, where we created some models for our e-commerce app. So the app is now going to start really getting some traction. I'll be here every step of the way. Let's jump straight into it. Okay, so my browser is open on the main repository for this course, the link to which is in the description below. Whilst you're there, taking a look, can you please like and add a comment on this video, and also subscribe to the channel and click the bell so you're notified every time I add a video. Just got that out of the way. So if you've been following along, you'll know now what you need to do. You need to go into the main branches, scroll down until you find the module that we're on, which is module 11. When it opens, click in steps and find module 11. These are the steps as marked down for this module. So I'll be following along every step, but I'm not going to have it in GitHub. You have it on a different screen by all means, but because I'm doing the video here, I'll have it in my Visual Studio Code. So you can see here I've got steps, module 11. So this follows on from module 10. As always, just double check that your configuration, your directories on the left hand side here are exactly the same as what I've got. Okay, there's a list here of everything you should have. So we've now got an e-commerce app which we added in the last module. We've got models here. We've made the migration. So this is what you should now be seeing. In this video, we'll be creating another file for that app called utils. If you're not quite in the same point as where you should be at this point, which is like what you're looking at the screen here, then what you can do is you can just clone down or pull down from module 11, and you should get everything in sync on your machine. So here are the steps. So cd into the root directory, we always do this, and always fire up a virtual environment. I've already done it. You see my terminal here, I've got venv in brackets. That means I've got the virtual environment running. I've got another terminal open where I've got the server running as well. It's always handy to have them both up and running, so we haven't got to keep running those same commands over and over and over again. So let's start where we left off in the last module. We've built our models. So if you remember the last module, we created models to help us capture data through the life cycle of a product. So the creation of a product. So we have like a stock, so items, and then they go into a user's cart in a way of a cart item. We use managers and things like that. We then have sources. We have invoice lines, invoices, and a wallet. So each user has a wallet, and that wallet has a Stripe ID. The Stripe ID is essentially the Stripe's customer ID for our user. Okay, that's what we did in the last video. It's worth looking back. If you haven't watched it, it's worth looking back and just to understand what the models are doing. I try to create it in a way that is quite intuitive, and it's just easy to see the steps that the data goes through, from creating an item all the way through to buying an item and creating invoices. Okay, so we are following Stripe's API. So in this video, basically, it's all about creating a utility file with an e-commerce manager. Now, the e-commerce manager is just a class, a Python class, that allows us to call the Stripe SDK. Now, the Stripe SDK is a Python package that's been created by Stripe for any Python developer that wants to connect to their API. Okay, so Stripe has an API. We click on here, take us through to their documentation, and it's got all of the different endpoints here. You can see on the left-hand side, you've got all of the different resources, and it just goes through in detail how you go about working with the API that they have via their software developer kit. So the SDK allows us to easily make calls to the API without the need of a package such as requests. Now, we've got requests in our project because we do make an API call later in this course without an SDK, but for now we're just using the SDK, so we just work about it in a different way. So these are the docs. In the utils that we'll be using today or creating today, I've got the links to each and every page of the docs that we're using. So if we're making posting a customer, so creating a customer or updating a customer or getting a customer, I've got links to each and every one of the documentation pages on Stripe. Okay, so all you've got to do is just open it up in the browser and you can see exactly what I'm trying to achieve. So the first step is to create a file in e-commerce called utils. Okay, within utils, we will be, well, I'm not going to copy all of this. There's a lot of code. So I'm going to go into GitHub and actually copy it from here because the how it's rendered allows us to have this little copy button. Let's copy that. Go here and just paste it all into the utils.py file. Now, the reason I'm doing it this way is because if I try to type this whilst you're watching along, it's going to be very, very tedious. And essentially, you're not going to get any more out of it than what you would do if I was just to copy paste and then walk you through the methodology, why I've created it in this manner and how it all works. Okay, so we've got a few imports at the top here. Dateutil is one of the packages that we installed in the last module. Datetime is a Python package. We're importing settings that we looked at before, so we have access to all of our settings, all of the models that we created in the last module, and also the Stripe SDK. So to create a Stripe client, a callable client for our class, the first thing we must do is call stripe.api key and then equals settings, and we pass through the Stripe secret key. Now the Stripe secret key is what we added to our settings in the last module. I won't show you where it is because it's got my actual secret key for my test account, but that creates a callable client for our e-commerce manager. If you're not familiar with SDKs, then do some research as to what they are. Essentially, it's a package of Python code for us, because it's a Python SDK, that allows us to easily make API calls rather than having to construct a request, a post or a get or a put request. You can just make a call to the SDK class and call methods. It's much, much easier to use an SDK when you're familiar with it. Okay, so that's why we're using the Stripe SDK. So we have a constructor, so a dunder_init method, to which we always pass through user, and we then have args and keyword arguments. Okay, so we've got a whole bunch of instance variables. Got a typo there. Before I got all of them before I added it all to GitHub, but never mind. And then we add some instance variables here. Okay, so when we instantiate the class, we always pass through user. From user, we get the user profile, and then we have a few other keyword arguments that they're not massively important. We can pass them through, and it allows us to use the e-commerce manager in a slightly different way. But if we don't use them, it's no drama, because we can still make some calls to the e-commerce manager. So at the top here, we've got some application methods. Let me minimize these. And then we've got some API methods as well. So let's start with the API methods actually, and then it kind of makes more sense. So when we instantiate the e-commerce manager by passing through a user, we then have access to some API calls. So we have a method called getProfile. Now if we call, so it'll be Stripe, so we create a manager, so a client if you like, so it'll be e-commerce manager. Let me show you what I mean. So in the views or some other file in this project, we would say manager equals e-commerce manager, and we pass through request.user, okay? And then under that, we would then be able to say new profile would equal manager dot get profile, okay? There we go. And that would be calling this get profile method, and it would return the profile that is against that user. Okay, so that's the idea. That's how we will call and use this manager. So it's just an easy way of connecting Stripe's SDK with our project to make callables that we can use across the e-commerce app and other apps if we decide to. So the docs for this get profile method are here. So if we just go add that to our browser, you can see that we are creating the Stripe API key. That's what we did at the top of this utils file, okay? And then you call Stripe customer retrieve, and then you pass through the Stripe ID for that particular customer. Now that Stripe ID for us will be the Stripe ID in the wallet. Remember, the wallet is a one-to-one, there's a one-to-one connection with the user. Okay, so when we create a wallet, we make a call to post and create a customer at Stripe. We get their Stripe ID and we save it against the wallet. And then forevermore, that customer ID will be linked to Stripe. And that's how we sync between the two systems. Okay, so we've got a get profile. We've got a post profile. This will be creating the Stripe customer. and then we've got a put profile. So this will be updating the customer. Get, post, put. Okay, we haven't got a delete profile. We have no need for that in this project. But we take this URL, dump it into our browser, and you can see that this is the create customer. You can see the URL is made up very simple. If you put delete there, it will come up with the docs. But that URL, if you question how this actually works, then I would urge you to actually look at the Stripe documentation and read it for yourself. But you can see here we'll create a stripe.api equals and pass through the test secret key. And then it's actually got most of the secret key there. I'll probably, in fact I will, by the time this goes out, I'll create new secret keys for myself. So no dramas there. So what we call is then stripe.customer, because Stripe is now a callable, a client we can call, stripe.customer.create, and then we pass through a description, and that will return a customer ID. Now we actually pass through a little bit more than just a description. We pass through an email, a name, which is the full name, which is the method that we've got in the model, and then the address. But for this, we construct a dictionary with all of the keyword or key value pairs by calling an application method called create Stripe address. Here we go. So we call this within the post customer profile, So that's how we create it. Then we get or create a wallet, which I'll show you in a second, but we call a wallet object, which gets or creates. And we get the Stripe ID from the response, and then we save the wallet. We return the Stripe customer, okay? So that's how we work. That's how we post and create a profile at Stripe. We get the Stripe ID and we save that to our database. So our database should, in theory, always be synced with Stripe. Now we can use Stripe webhooks just to make sure that when there's something that occurs on Stripe, so an activity that occurs on Stripe, we then retrieve a webhook signal, and then we do something with that, but that's not something that we're going to add into this tutorial. It's a little bit at a later date I might add it into this course as another module, but we're not looking at it in module 10 to 15 is what I'm trying to say. So then we've got put, so this will be updating the profile. We won't go through all of these. So these are all of the customer API endpoints. We've then got the source and card API endpoints. So you can see we've got list all sources. So a source in Stripe language is basically a payment source. So for us, it's a payment card. Okay. So this will list all sources, all cards associated to a customer. We save the Stripe ID of those sources into our database, but we don't save the card details. So the expiry date, the card number, postcode, things like that. We don't save that. We just save the customer, the Stripe ID. We can get an individual source. We can post a source. So when a customer purchases an item or they pay for their shopping cart, the card that they add into the form that we'll create in a future module will then be saved. We'll use that to create a card at Stripe, and we'll save that to the system. Okay, so we will create a card. Okay, and if you look, these are the docs for Stripe. There we have it. Okay, so this is the modify source. Oh, actually, what are we doing? Have I got the wrong ones there? No, this is put source. So this is the modify, right? So retrieve, it's update. So we retrieve the source, then we modify the source, and they're the docs for it. Okay, so we've got a list, we've got get, we've got put, and then we've got invoice items. Don't need to go through all of them. They're quite self-explanatory. So again, we get an invoice item, we put an invoice item, we post an invoice item. They're the different methods that we can use in the SDK. Then we've got list invoices, get invoice, put invoice, we've got post invoice. Now this is the most important. Post invoice is us creating an invoice. This is us charging a customer. So this is the one that we call when a user pays for their shopping cart. Okay, and it just goes through a few. It goes through the function, kind of follows what it supposed to do with Stripe, and that is it. If it's a new card that's being used, we retrieve a token. We then use that token to create a source. We then go through all of the items that are in the shopping cart, and we create invoice items. We then create an invoice appending those items to the invoice, and then we finalize the invoice, and then we pay the invoice. So we do a little try and accept, and that is us paying the invoice. It tries to. Now we have a few different accepts here. We don't need to look at all of them, but these are straight from Stripe. So we've got, we try, and if it successfully goes through, then we get the success message. If it fails, then we have a card error. So there could be something wrong with the card itself, could have expired. We have a rate limit, so we're making too many requests. Invalid requests, so the request could be poor and incorrect. Authentication error, so something doesn't match up with IDs and what have you. We've got API connection, we've got Stripe error, and we've got just a standard exception there. So if something serious happened, we have been notified. Otherwise, if the payment goes through, we then call the clear items method, which is in the manager that we looked at in the last module, and it clears all of the items out of the user's shopping cart, creates a success message that adds a status of 200, and it then returns a JSON response or a dictionary with status 200, message is success, your payment was successful, and it passes through the invoice ID from the invoice that's been created here. Okay? So that's quite an important one to understand. So the post invoice is kind of the heart of this manager. All of these other bits and pieces allow us to sync all of the different tables at Stripe against our database schema. So sources, invoice lines, invoices, and I believe that's it, and customers. Now above this, we've kind of glossed over this, okay? So we've got application methods. Now I will touch on this, I won't go through each of them, but basically the cart object will return a user's shopping cart. The wallet object will return a user's wallet object. Okay, that's what we're trying to do. Source object, we have to pass through an ID of the source, so the custom source ID, and it will return our source object for that custom ID. Same with line ID, line object, invoice object. You've got the create Stripe address, which creates a dictionary that is kind of Stripe proof with all of the right key value pairs according to their docs. We then get source data, get invoice data. That creates a dictionary that we use for the Django template or create another module. Okay, so these are all of our application methods. So the idea is here we instantiate the class by passing through the user and maybe the source ID, and then we can, from that instantiated class, we can then make calls to the Stripe SDK and return things like, you know, the Stripe source source ID, the Stripe source card number, things like that. Okay, so what was I going to show you? So Stripe ID. So let me show you this. And let me show you this. We are not using a signal. So in our users app, we're using signals. So a signal is something built into Django that will receive a signal from a model, retrieve the signal and do something based on the action. So you could do a post save. So if a model is saved, there's a signal that is sent from the sender, which in this case would, let's say, the user model. The receiver, the signal, would receive that signal and from that create a user profile. That's how it always makes sure that we've got a user profile for every user. We went through that in a previous module. We're not using signals in e-commerce. Instead, what I've done is that when we instantiate this e-commerce class, this e-commerce manager, by posting a user, the first thing it does is it tries to retrieve a Stripe ID from that user's wallet. Well, if it's the first time we've instantiated the e-commerce manager with a user, they haven't got a wallet. We haven't created one yet. So the first thing it tries to do is wallet equals self wallet object. So we try to retrieve the wallet. So we're calling wallet object. You can see here that what we do is we get or create. So it's either there is one in the database or we create one using the user as an attribute. So it's either there is one in the database or there is not. And if there is not, we create one. Once we've created it, so if not wallet Stripe ID, so this new wallet does not have a Stripe ID. It can't have because we've only just created it. So we haven't actually called the post customer API call or method. We then, if not Stripe ID, so we haven't got Stripe ID on a new user, we then call self post profile. So if you look at post profile, where is it? There we go, post profile. We create a customer. Okay, so we create a customer at Stripe. We then get the wallet we've just created for that user. We add the Stripe ID to the wallet, and we save the wallet and return the Stripe customer. And at that point, we then return the wallet Stripe ID. So if we've already got a wallet, we already have a Stripe ID, and it just returns the Stripe ID. If we don't have a wallet, it creates a new user. Stripe creates a wallet in our database, adds the Stripe ID to that wallet, returns the wallet ID. That way we guarantee that if the user is brand new to the site, we still won't have any errors in creating a payment because we're using the manager. That's why I've created a manager. It's just a nice way of handling the communication of data between us and our application and Stripe's API. Okay, and between the API and us, we're using an SDK to kind of channel that data in a nice, easy way. Okay, so that is the manager. I would strongly advise you just to go through this line by line and just really understand how I've tried to construct this. I think it's easy enough to understand. I've got doc strings on all of the methods so you can read what it is. So returns a user Stripe ID, cart object, so use to get or create a linked cart. So a shopping cart. So a user, if you remember in the last module, a user has a one-to-one link with a cart object. Now, if it's a new user, we don't have a cart. So when we call cart object, we either get the cart object or we create the cart object, and then we return the cart. Rather than just doing a cart objects.get, which is the API, the database API method that we can use, we do a get or create. Okay? Wallet object used to get or create a linked wallet. Source object used to get or create a source object. Okay? So it's either the source is in our database or we add it to the database. That's how we always make sure it's absolutely paramount that our database is in sync with the Stripe database at all times. Okay. Now, I will touch on the webhook thing one more time. If you as a business, if you created an e-commerce app and you decide to use Stripe as a payment company, and you want to create customers directly in the Stripe UI, without webhooks, it would be difficult to then subsequently create that user yourselves in our database because we're using a programmatic way of creating users. So the user signs up, the user buys an item, goes to the shopping cart, pays via the checkout, and what it does, it creates a user, creates a wallet, creates a shopping cart, they fill the shopping cart and they pay, create a source, so on and so forth, invoices. If you created a customer in Stripe, it'd be then very difficult to replicate that manually in the built-in admin page. So if you want to do that, then you would use webhooks. So as soon as you create a customer in Stripe, a webhook would be fired by Stripe to our system. We would retrieve that signal and then do something with it. And in that case, what we would do, we would create a user, create a user profile, we would add the address that's in Stripe to the address in our database and so on and so forth. That's how we would do it. We would use webhooks, but that's kind of not part of this tutorial. But look, like this video and add a comment into the comments of this video. And if you want to see webhooks, then I can create another module at a later date, but that's not part of this course. Okay, so that's it. We've just created an e-commerce manager that allows us to connect our application to a third party's application via an API. It's called an API, okay? And we're doing that using a software developer kit or an SDK. Okay, so we are now able to connect two applications using Stripe's SDK. Okay, so really, really powerful stuff. Hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too much. I would strongly suggest, being that this is kind of the back end of the course, I would strongly suggest watching the module 10 and module 11 over and over. Just understand those models. Understand this manager really, really deeply. You know, do some deep learning on it so you can understand what we're trying to do. It's all about capturing data throughout the cycle, you know, each and every step of the way, making calls to the API to make sure that we are completely in sync with Stripe at all times, and doing it in a way that's nice and easy to read for the programmer or the developer, software engineer. Okay, so we've just created the e-commerce manager. That's the end of this module, I believe. Just have a quick look at the what have we got here? Get invoice. Yeah, that is the end. All we were doing in this module, was quite a heavy one, was to look at the manager and write it and get it in your project. You can see here the only difference is we've got utils added to e-commerce. So just make sure you're again in sync with where we are, and that is the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you in module 12.